Actually, I feel this is very important, very key actually in the Dakini's whisper and also the nature of this lineage, to know the mystical aspect of or dimension of Ramazan Kappa and his followers, so-called ear whisper lineage, Nengyu. Of course, this mystical aspect of Ramazan Kappa was not dominant or emphasized and not paid attention much, especially in the West, because of translation of Ramazan Kappa's literature, main literatures, and all these things available, right? He was considered to be a great philosopher, great scholar, great thinker, especially his literature was translated in the area of academia and also Western Buddhist communities. Globally, he as a great thinker, one of the greatest thinkers this world produced, especially in Tibet. So in other words, it's dominated by those kind of way of thinking, consideration, and handles. Then very little mystical aspect was mentioned in his life stories, which we usually know. He was the founder of Geluk, which was consists of lots of monks and nuns and big monasteries and so forth. But in the recent literatures, many of you might have read Tsongkhapa, the Buddha in the Snow Land or something like that, and translated by Chöpten Jinpa. Tsongkhapa's life stories reveal some different aspect, this human aspect, as well as mystic, Tsongkhapa as a mystic. And Tsongkhapa had a lot of visions of Manjushiris and so forth. So I just want to say a few words about that. So this is different from what we normally heard or understood. Since I was young, I dove into this lineage, right? And then, in my mind, always had this, not conflict, but how we can not balance even this mystic aspect. Each of us also have this spontaneity and not the visions, but some kind of intuitive feeling versus this intellectual thinking, human thought, the potential liberating power of human thought, this importance of human discipline, not the chit-chatting, this disciplined human thought, how we can not negotiate, but how can bring those two, how can go together, those kind of questions. But beautifully, Tsongkhapa solved that. Not solving, at least for me, in my mind, as I grow older, I appreciate his presence, how he presented to the public. So he was a great philosopher. He genuinely believed the potentials of human thought to push ourselves to the edge of the human thought. Of course, ultimately he believes, as a Buddhist, agreed the highest state of enlightenment is beyond concept, beyond thought, beyond language, beyond duality, beyond dichotomy. But it doesn't mean we have to dump human thought or human thinking, this rational thinking throughout the path. There's, of course, mystical traditions in spiritual world, completely from the beginning. They're the path where we don't value the human concept, because concept is not ultimate. Our purpose is to get rid of concept or something like that. But Ramazan Kappa's approach is try to use this disciplined applications of human thought, then bring to the edge, then drop it at the last moment. In Tibetan tradition, use a metaphor of a walking stick for an elderly man. He took really seriously this idea, potential of languages and human thought are the aid or support or assistant. It's not ultimate, but assistant, like a walking stick for elderly man. Of course, we should not fixate on the language and the thought itself, but it is a mean that enables to get to where we want to go. We need a walking stick. We are like elderly men, from the beginning, if we throw the walking stick, like my mom now, it's very difficult to walk. Instead of walking stick, I have to hold my hand, but same thing, something like that. Ultimately, we abandon. That's also Buddha did not this, all these practice other method. And then ultimately, when you reach the other shore, we jump or deep, spontaneous. Lama Tsongkhapa, the approach is very similar to what the Buddha did. Also, his lifestyle, the wandering yogis. It's not about sitting on the big monastery and founded the monastery and collecting all the students. Throughout his history, it seems like he was wandering and never stayed in one place for a long time unless he was doing a retreat. Other than that, he never stayed in one place. Of course, a great teacher stayed just visiting one place, or the students gathered, right? Then they're moving here and there. Then students started to complain about, you are getting old, I'm getting old. Maybe it's about the time to settle, please, because when monks are moving, then local people have to feed. So it's a burden for local people as well, like 100, 200 people every time move here, there, then have to feed all. Then the students started to talk about the necessity to have a monastery to settle. And you are also getting old and need to settle. Then he said, okay. Then he founded the Ganden Monastery, finally. So that sort of background we need to know. Otherwise, as if like he's sitting on a big throne and a big pointed heart and to disciple there and established a big monastery. That was not his intention, but ended up kind of viewed that way. So this is one area where Tsongkhapa driven very deeply, this human thought, liberating potential of human thought. And he pushed the limit in which human thought can be defined. Usually, just the function of the thought is internal chattering, but this is different. In other words, he make a distinction, the fundamental difference between disciplined application of thought and random thought or endless chatter that tend to arise in the form of illumination and self-orientation based on habitual patterns, either future or past, rarely being present. Then his agreement of the ultimately we need to jump, we need to drop, spontaneous. So there are lots of talk, this gradual enlightenment, or what you call the spontaneous or sudden enlightenment or something like that. Ultimately, there's no difference. Of course, one of the important points in his life is about Nagarjuna's philosophy of emptiness. He really wanted to get to the bottom of that emptiness, idea of emptiness. Because everything is empty, no object reality, then how scared out with the moral code, or how we can distinguish right from wrong, how things function to begin with. How can we preserve the functional regularity we use, right? When we touch the hot water, it's hot. And when we drink the tea, it's release the thirst and so forth. And also intersubjectivities. So he really nailed down that aspect, this emptiness domain. So that's important contribution of Lama Tsongkhapa. And also those things we talked in the different contexts, this equation of emptiness and interdependence or interconnectedness or relativities. Main point I wanted to say here is he started to have visions. The early days, he was not able to communicate with the extra humans, kind of mystical figure called Manjusharis. Initially, he was not able to communicate with him directly. but he had an interpreter called Umapa. Then he asked the questions to Umapa, then the Umapa was a kind of medium, right? So he received the teaching or instruction from Manjushri. But later on, he himself acquired the power, and he was able to communicate with Manjushri day-to-day basis. So in other words, he was having a mystic experience. From our point of view, if we called that mystics. However, amazing thing about him is he doesn't use that as an authority or excuse. Okay, I have this vision, so this is true, based on what Manjushri said. Okay, because Manjushri is awakened, Manjushri said this, then I received this vision, so this is the truth. He never do that. He really pushed the human thought, rationals. Yeah, he was a deep thinker. Therefore, that mystic aspect of Ramazan Kaba was not, of course, revealed or emphasized. And himself was not really saying, oh, I'm a mystic. You know, I received this teaching from Manjushri, so I'm authentic, something like that. So throughout this year whisper lineage, and perhaps some Gelu teachers, all my teachers actually, all Gelu teachers have this flavor or taste of that. You know, taste of humility, taste of really compassion. It's bodhicitta. Because without language, we cannot communicate. Thing is that this human thought is a common, but then mystic aspect is a very personal, no? Even I said I had this vision, so other people cannot really relate to that. But then he bring it down to the world of convention and the world of language, but not ordinary, chit-chatting and undisciplined language. But he was able to cultivate or demonstrate what's possible with language. It's a little bit of similarity of the kind of Wittgenstein or some Western modern philosophers using language to cut through the language itself kind of approach. That's Chandra Kirti was also like that. So anyway, we not abandon the language and human thought from the beginning. Eventually we are going to jump. We have to jump. He knows that. So that's the mystical part of it. Then when it comes to Tantra, so he also receiving all this instruction from Manjushri directly. You know, what kind of practice, some very fine point. He asks questions. Doubt. When he has a doubt, then he asks the questions. One of the central theme or aims of Vajrayana practice is cultivating the subtlest or subtle state of consciousness whose tone is bliss, great bliss. Subtlest state or subtler state of consciousness whose tone is bliss, and applying that to meditation on emptiness. Use bliss as a subject mind to perceive emptiness. So that's the tantric method. That's central to Vajrayana practice. This refers to, as you know, the union of great bliss and emptiness. So in other words, he was really dive into this Vajrayana yogic technique and the yogic practice. And based on these visions he received from Manjushri, and also his, you can say, the sutric teachings, he established this Ramlim practice all of you are familiar with. Another point here I wanted to mention is this. So I talked about he didn't take it for granted, or he didn't use the Manjushri as an authority for his own, you can say, awakening or enlightenment or revelation. So that's very similar to the Buddha. What the Buddha did. Look at the Buddha's life, wandering style, as well as what he said. Your own enlightenment is something you have to work out yourself. I cannot give you enlightenment. Manjushri cannot make you awaken. Guru cannot wake you up. Only aid. I can show you the way, but cannot give you. Those things are very important to remind ourselves. The Buddha can show only the truth he has seen, he himself experienced. So it's very experiential, and he can help others for revelations and awakening. So those little bit of flavor of ear whisper lineage, which came from, you can say, this mystic figure, you can say extra human being Manjushri to Lama Tsongkhapa, and then all these wandering teachers. We recite their name, list of the name, Jambe, Yatso, and Sapa, and so forth. Those are ear whisper lineage. So this Tomanamo practice is one of those several transmissions, collectional transmission, Manjushri passed on to Lama Tsongkhapa. It's called Jamian Choko. Jamian is a Manjushri, Cho is a Dharma, Kor is a circle. So circle of Dharma or teaching transmitted by Manjushri to Lama Tsongkhapa. Then Tomanamo is one of deep. Each practice is very deep and complete. But as you can see, this is so beautiful and simple and beautiful and profound. Like to go into the into the essence of the Tantra.